My name is Audrey Hanson, and I was born in Great Britain, a place called Newport, which essentially was in South Wales, and my parents moved to Devon, another part of England, after the war, and I worked outside London just before I left England. I worked as an administrator in a girls', we call them public schools, but actually it was a girls' private boarding school where a lot of English people boarded their children for several years while they worked out of the country. I wanted to travel, and the only way I could think to do that was to go as an immigrant, because you couldn't take money out of England, supposing I had any, at that time. So I managed to travel to Canada as an immigrant. I was assured by the Canadian authorities that when you get to Toronto, they help you find a job, and you've got all your paperwork and resumes and all the rest of it, references. Well, they just laugh at you when you get there, because they don't want people in the city, they want them in the hinterland, backward somewhere. So I always think of Toronto as a city of lost souls, because it was full at the time of Poles and Australians and all sorts of people who were looking for work. I was very fortunate, and I managed to get a job working in Toronto General Hospital for the nursing director, and on the basis of that, I applied, not thinking I would get the job, to Canadian Pacific Railroads, because it was my understanding they only gave jobs to Canadian students. Well, somehow they took me, and because of that, I then left my job in Toronto, and I traveled for about 6 weeks around the United States and Canada, eastern part of the United States and Canada. And then, of course, I went across Canada by train without having to, that was just Canadian Pacific Railroad took me off to Banff, where I spent an entire summer working at the Banff Springs Hotel. And again, I was extremely fortunate, because the weather that particular summer was very good, seemingly everywhere. So I did a lot of hiking. And there I met person who became a very good friend of mine, and she was being, I can't think of the word right now, but her cousin was bringing her into this country. I'll think of the word in a minute. And unknown to me, she wrote to him and said, "How would you like to support my friend as well?" So in that way I came to the United States. I was going to come anyway, but just to travel. But this way, when I came, I could get a green card and work. I was actually planning on going on to Australia after spending some time here, but I met the man who became my husband. We met at a party that was given by mutual friends, and he came through the door, and I looked at him, and we both knew that was it. And so that was it, how it was for 53 years. My husband was born in this country, but his family comes from the north of England, near Manchester. And we actually had a house near Whittier. We both worked, but the department that he worked for in contracts administration for Firestone Tire and Rubber closed down. So the decision was made mutually. I mean, I really supported it. He went to law school, so we had a very hard 4 or 5 years, very hard. At any rate, he passed the bar the first time, and what else can I say? Our life just went on, progressed.
Now, I know that you were involved with the school board. Was that with due to your son going through school, or how did that come about?
Well, it came about because we had in Burbank in 1980 absolutely terrible strike. It went on for 3 weeks, and it was there was a lot of really very vicious behavior. I mean, the secondary teachers at Burroughs threw the furniture out the window, and there were a lot of, I mean, if you wanted to get into a parking lot, my car was rocked, and it was a very difficult time. And because of that and some other reasons to do with my son, I thought, well, you know, I mean, everybody was dissatisfied. Parents were dissatisfied, and certainly the teachers were. And so I thought, well, I'll run for the Board of Education. And people said to me, well, you just don't stand a chance. I mean, you weren't even born in this country, and you only lived in Burbank 7 years. But that kind of, I guess, made me more determined that I was going to give it my best shot. And it was running against incumbents, and I did succeed in winning. And I actually served 3 terms, 12 years, 3 4-year terms. So, and I came on the board in 1981. So that was when I think back on my life and accomplishments, I think of that as something that I'm very proud of, because I wasn't born in this country, and I managed to win an election, a local election.
That sounds quite an achievement. So, what is something about you that people here at Vintage or other places would be surprised to know?
Well, they might be surprised to know that somewhere in my life before I left England, and I can't exactly tell you what year that was, but I worked on a farm, or I did some work on a farm. I can't say that I worked, I wasn't really paid. So I milked cows, which probably, I mean, by hand, you know, how you had to do it then. So probably would surprise people here.
And which living person do you most admire?
Well, the living person that I most admire happens to be the King of Jordan, because I think that is a very small country. He faces enormous odds in the Middle East. He manages to somehow keep his country together, yet he does speak up for his position, and of course the question of being against the terrorists is foremost on anybody's mind who lives in the Middle East, and he has a lot of refugees in his country. And I think that he speaks with a great deal of knowledge and balance.
And which deceased person do you most admire?
Oh, Winston Churchill, without any hesitation, because he kept us together during World War II and inspired everybody. Let's see, I was the happiest during the 53 years that I was married. I was very fortunate, very fortunate.
Tell me more about that.
Well, what can I say? We met, fell in love immediately, stayed that way for 53 years. We had a lot of interests in common. Traveling, opera, music, books, politics.
And what was your adulthood like with him?
What was my adulthood like with him? It was, every day was an interesting day, because there was always conversations to be had about something that was interesting.
What would you consider consider your most treasured or cherished possessions?
Let me see, what would I consider my most cherished possessions? Well, I had my husband and I had the great fortune to be able to visit a Stone Age tribe in the Balian Valley, called the Dani people, actually, in the Balian Valley of Eranjaya, because we had a friend who was doing research for the Indonesian government. And I have some of the things, in some cases, that were worn by these people. And to me, that is my most treasured, several possessions I have of that time, because I have an interest in people who, non-Europeans, parts of the world that we don't know very much about, so that was certainly a treasured possession of mine.
And what activities nowadays do you most enjoy?
Well, let's see. What activities do I most enjoy? During my life with my husband and my son, we used to hike and do some backpacking. And I still can do small hikes up in the Angeles Crest Highway. I enjoy that. Opera, music, books. I'm probably a news addict. I like international news, and I certainly am a political addict. So, a lot of things that interest me. Let's see, the big news event that stays in my memory is the memories of World War II, because I was a child, but well aware of what was happening. So with air raids and, lack of food and survival, and everything got dreary because there was no upkeep of anything. So, my biggest challenge. Well, I guess my biggest challenge is adjusting to life after my husband died. And I have not succeeded yet. I'm still struggling with it.
What's the best advice you have ever been given?
Let's pass on that. I can't think of any. Advice that I would pass on to my son and my grandson, who is now 20, is take advantage of opportunities when they come up. Don't find years later that, I wish I'd done that. And I feel very fortunate because I don't have any regrets about my life. I don't look back and think, gosh, I wish I'd done that. Or if I could have dinner with somebody who is either living or dead, I would go back to Winston Churchill.
If you could step into a time machine, where would you go?
Can you mean somewhere in the world?
Anywhere in time. You could go into the future, you could go into the past, you could go...
all right. So if I stepped into a time machine, I don't want to go forward. Don't think that looks very good. Perhaps I'd go back to... I don't know, that's rather a difficult question to think about. Pre-World War II days. Somewhere, the 1930s historically were not very good, but maybe end of the 1920s and early 1930s, somewhere in there, perhaps.
Thank you.
One of the things I didn't mention, which really is important, to run for elective office, you have to be a citizen.
How did you do that?
Well, I became a citizen in 1980.
Oh.
Because you can't run for elective office unless you're a citizen. as an adjunct to my life as a Board of Education member, I was elected by representatives of local school boards to be a director representing Los Angeles County on the state California School Boards Association, and served there for several years, which was very challenging, dealing with legislation and trying to ensure the best for school district. One of the questions was favorite country. I mean, they were all interesting. So I don't think I do. I spent 2 months on the continent of Africa, which was maybe, I don't know, it just gets really complicated because I thought Japan was wonderful and I enjoyed China, and so I don't know where we go with all of that.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being willing to be our first vintage interview.